The posts were old, splintered at the base, weathered from too many seasons of wind and silence. He drove the rusted nail in with 2 hard swings, sweat carving a path through the dust on his face. Another post leaned too far to save. He let it fall. Some things you couldn't prop up anymore, no matter how much you wanted to. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The field beyond the fence was brittle and yellowing, a tired patchwork of grass and regret. It hadn't rained in 9 weeks. He told himself it didn't matter. Told himself if he could just keep the fences up, maybe the land would remember how to hold on. Maybe the bank would forget what day it was. He wiped his brow with the sleeve of his shirt. The sun was low, caught between the hills like it wasn't sure whether to set or stay a little longer. That was how he felt most days. Too tired to push on, too proud to quit. A dog barked once from the porch and went quiet. Then the hum of tires, a sound he hadn't heard in a while. His hand froze on the hammer. No one came down this road without a reason. He squinted toward the curve in the gravel. Headlights blinked through the dust, slow and uncertain, like the driver wasn't sure they belonged here. The truck was small, older than his by a few years, its bed packed high with boxes and tarps. It pulled up near the gate and stopped, engine ticking into the quiet like it was thinking. The door opened. She stepped out. Thin jacket, boots that had seen better days. Dirt on her jeans, wind in her hair. Not scared, but not fearless either. She stood still for a second, sizing up the land, or maybe him. Then she spoke, voice carrying just enough strength to cover the edges of it. "I'm not looking for trouble, just a place to sleep a night or two. Far from everything." He looked at her, looked at the boxes, the way the truck sagged on one side, looked at the sky bleeding into dusk like it always did, no matter how broken the world got. He didn't say yes, just nodded toward the tree line. Then he went back to fixing what was already too far gone. She waited by the truck after he pointed toward the trees, like she half expected him to change his mind. The wind tugged at her sleeves. Dusk was closing in fast. Cooler now, the kind of chill that crept under your clothes if you stood still too long. He kept hammering, not looking at her, not speaking. That was the deal. She asked. He nodded. That should have been enough. Eventually she climbed into the truck, drove maybe 50 yards down the dirt path that wrapped around the edge of the property, then parked beneath a knotted old oak. From the porch he could just barely see her figure moving around, unloading a faded tarp, dragging out a tent that resisted every effort to stand. She wasn't good at it. He could tell. It bent wrong. The poles clattered. She tried again, swore softly. Tried again. He told himself not to go down there, not his problem, not anymore. The last time he helped someone it cost him more than money. Some lessons don't need to be learned twice. Still, as the sky deepened into bruised violet, he found himself standing by the fence line, one boot up on the lowest rail, watching her silhouette shift against the failing light. She moved like someone running low on both options and time. A breeze picked up and nearly took the tarp with it. She caught it just in time, dropped to her knees, and stayed there a minute longer than necessary. Head bowed, shoulders shaking, or maybe just tired. Hard to say from this far. He whistled for the dog, then whistled again when the dog didn't come. Bought himself an excuse to walk a little closer. "You okay?" he called out. She looked up, startled. Hair stuck to her cheek. For a second she seemed like she might lie. Then she just nodded and said, "Long day." He didn't press, just pointed toward the barn and said, "There's a hose if you need water." "No lights out here, though. Gets real dark." "Thanks," she said, voice softer now. "This is just for a couple nights." He nodded again. But in his gut, he already knew. People don't drive to the edge of nowhere with their whole life in the back of a truck for a couple nights. The fire crackled low, barely more than a flicker of warmth in the heavy dark. He'd brought over a few dry logs and a tin coffee pot without saying much, just set them down, near where she'd finally gotten the tent standing, crooked but upright. She'd thanked him with a small nod and a tighter smile. Now they sat on opposite sides of the flames, shadows drawing long across the dirt. Crickets filled the silence. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called. He poked at the fire with a stick, watching embers float up and vanish into the black. She pulled her knees to her chest, arms wrapped tight around them. Her boots were unlaced, scuffed to hell. One of the soles flapped slightly when she shifted. He didn't ask what she was running from. That kind of truth had a weight to it, something you didn't ask a person to carry unless you were ready to help shoulder it. And he wasn't sure he was, not yet. Still, her silence was different from the usual kind he'd grown used to. It wasn't bitter or cold. It was careful. Like someone who'd had to measure her words for too long and didn't know what it felt like to just let them out anymore. She stirred the fire with a stick, then glanced across at him. "I used to think I liked cities," she said, so quietly he almost missed it. "Now I don't know if I ever did." He let that sit for a moment. "They're loud," he said finally, "up fast." "Too many people pretending they're not lonely," she added, almost like she hadn't meant to. He didn't smile, but something about the way he looked at her changed. "Out here," he said, "you don't have to pretend. You just are." She nodded. A flicker of something, relief maybe, crossed her face. She took the tin cup when he handed it to her. Warm coffee, bitter and strong. She didn't flinch. The fire popped. Sparks danced between them, rising, vanishing. No more words came. None were needed. Out there, in the dark, under all that sky, the silence wasn't empty. It was shared. The rain started just before dawn, soft at first, then steady. He heard it tapping against the tin roof as he poured feed into the troughs. The ground sucked at his boots, the kind of mud that pulled like doubt, slow and heavy. By the time he rounded the back pasture, her truck was still there, parked at an awkward angle near the tree line. One side slumped lower than the other. Flat. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over, not expecting her to be awake, but she was. Sitting in the front seat, arms folded, eyes on the steering wheel like it had wronged her. She rolled down the window slowly. "Bad morning," she muttered. He crouched beside the tire without asking, ran a hand around the rubber, checked the tread. It wasn't just flat, it was shredded. Sidewall torn open like it had scraped against something sharp. She stepped out of the cab, already soaked, and joined him. "I've got a patch kit," she offered. "That won't help," he said. "You're going to need the spare." She hesitated. "There isn't one." Of course there wasn't. He didn't ask why. Just stood up and headed toward his shed. When he came back, he was carrying one of his own. Same lug pattern, close enough. She didn't say anything while he worked, just held the flashlight when the clouds thickened and the rain got harder. At one point she offered to take over. He shook his head. "Let me finish," he said. "It's not much, but it's something I can still fix." She didn't argue. When the tire was on, he stood, wiped his hands again, and looked at her for the first time that morning. Really looked. Her hair was plastered to her face, jacket soaked through, but there was a kind of stillness in her now. Not peace, something harder, something that had taken root deep down, like she'd stopped waiting for things to get better and just decided to keep walking anyway. She opened the truck door and reached inside, came back with a bruised peach wrapped in a handkerchief, pressed it into his palm. "Thank you," she said, voice soft but clear. Before he could respond, she was already behind the wheel. The truck coughed, then caught. She turned it toward the road and drove off without looking back. No wave, no goodbye. He stood there a while after the engine disappeared, rain running down his collar, a peach in his hand. He noticed it the next morning, snagged on the barbed wire near the edge of the field, something pale fluttering in the wind, like a loose flag. At first he thought it was a scrap of tarp or some feed bag torn in the storm. But when he got closer, he saw the weave of it, soft, hand-stitched, a scarf, heron. It still smelled faintly like firewood and something floral, faint and worn in. He turned it over in his hands. One corner was frayed, the stitching coming loose. It hadn't been left on purpose. It had slipped, or caught on the fence as she left. He pulled it free, careful not to tear it worse, then just stood there for a while, watching the road she'd driven off on. She hadn't come back. He told himself that was fine. People passed through all the time, hitching rides, chasing silence, running from whatever made staying too hard. But still, something in his chest didn't sit right. That truck had looked overloaded, boxes stacked too high, things rattling around like they hadn't been packed for a destination, just an escape. And she hadn't said where she was headed, just away. He went back to the house, tossed the scarf onto the porch bench, but it didn't stay there long. The dog found it later, nosed it twice, then pulled it into his bed beside the door, curled around it like it was a thing that mattered. He didn't have the heart to take it back. That night, with the wind howling low across the hills, he sat on the porch with a beer and stared out at the dark. The fields looked like ghosts of themselves, dry, stretched thin. He wondered where she was sleeping, if her tire held, if she'd found a place that didn't ask questions. He told himself it didn't matter, that she was probably fine, that he didn't even know her name. But when he stood to go inside, he looked once more at the scarf, tucked beneath the dog's chin. Something about the way it stayed there, soft, unclaimed, a little bit lost, made the silence feel heavier than it had before. The envelope came on a Monday, stiff and official, tucked between a feed catalog and a coupon flyer he hadn't asked for. No return address on the front, just his name in cold machine-printed letters. He stared at it for a while, standing by the mailbox with the wind tugging at his coat. The paper felt heavier than it should. He knew what it was. He didn't need to open it to hear what it had to say. Still, he carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, like maybe it might forget how to be bad news if he didn't look too closely. The kettle boiled. He poured coffee with shaking hands, sat down, opened it. The language was polite, distant. A final notice, missed payments, grace periods expired. They had exhausted all reasonable accommodations. He read it twice, then a third time, not because he didn't understand, but because part of him wanted it to say something different the next time through. It didn't. He folded the letter, crisp and careful, and tucked it into the back drawer with the rest, the stack that had started thin and grown too thick to ignore. He slid the drawer shut like closing a door on something drowning. Outside, the wind had picked up. A storm was building somewhere out past the ridge. He grabbed his jacket and headed to the shed. If the fences didn't hold, the cattle would get loose. And if the cattle got loose, there'd be no chance of paying what little was left. He told himself it still mattered, told himself the work was still worth doing. By the time he made it to the south end, the sun was already dipping, bleeding orange across the fields. He slammed a post back into the clay, sweat and dust mixing on his brow. His knuckles bled where the wire had caught skin. The pain felt good, real. He looked out at the land, the rows of dry soil, the barn barely holding itself together. Maybe it was foolish to keep fighting. Maybe the smart thing would be to let it all go. But he wasn't built for letting go, not yet. Not while there was still a chance, any chance, that something good might find its way back. The barn had been sinking for years. One side leaned like it had grown tired of holding itself upright. Boards rotted through at the base, roof shingles missing in patches like a half-healed wound. He used to tell himself he'd fix it when the time was right, after harvest, after bills, after life stopped hitting so hard. The time never came. Until now. He stood in front of it with a crowbar in hand and no real plan, just the memory of her gaze the night she'd sat by the fire, how she looked past him, past the smoke and silence, straight at the barn like it meant something, like it wasn't just a relic but a beginning. That look stuck with him more than her words. He started by pulling down the rusted paneling near the doors, each nail coming out like a small defiance. Underneath, the frame still held. Weathered, yes, but not broken. He ran his fingers along the beams, felt the grain and grit of old wood that had survived more than he gave it credit for. The hammer came next, then the ladder, then the long, aching hours of work that didn't pay but gave back in other ways. He patched the lower walls first, cutting salvage planks to size, setting them slow and steady. Every nail that sank in was a kind of rhythm, a kind of prayer. Keep going, keep holding, don't quit yet. The neighbors would call it pointless, spending time on something no one used, something the bank would likely claim in a month's time. But he didn't do it for them. He didn't even know if he was doing it for himself. Maybe he just wanted something in his world to look less ruined. Maybe he needed to believe that if wood could be reclaimed, so could people. By late afternoon, the light hit the barn just right. The fresh boards caught the sun, warm and golden, like the place had taken a deep breath. He stood back, wiped his brow, and imagined what it might look like finished, not just standing, but welcoming. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like he was bracing for an ending. He felt like he'd started something, even if he didn't know what. He was on the porch, sharpening a blade that didn't really need sharpening, just something to keep his hands busy. The barn stood behind him, half restored and silent, catching the gold of late afternoon like it had something to be proud of. The coffee beside him had gone cold. He didn't hear the truck until it was already turning up the drive, same dented bumper, same stubborn rattle. He stood slowly, squinting into the dust as it rolled to a stop near the oak tree she once called home for a night. The engine cut. Silence fell hard. She stepped out, boots hitting gravel like a rhythm she remembered. Same jacket, though the sleeves were rolled up now, sunburn along her collarbone. Her hair was tied back this time, and there were lines around her eyes he didn't remember. She looked like someone who had been somewhere, done something hard, and come back not quite the same. He didn't move, just watched as she walked toward him, steady but cautious, like she wasn't sure if she had the right to be here. When she reached the bottom step, she didn't ask permission. "Didn't mean to vanish," she said, voice low but certain, "but I had an idea." He waited, arms crossed. Let her fill the silence. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, worn at the edges. Inside were papers, blueprints, notes scrawled in pen, her handwriting. "I started looking into grants, community land projects, historical restoration. I thought maybe your barn isn't just a barn." He didn't take the envelope, not yet, just stared at it, then at her. "You said you just needed a place to stay," he said. "I did," she replied, "and then I realized maybe I needed more than that. Maybe we both did." The porch creaked beneath her feet as she stepped up one stair, then another. "I want to help," she said softer now, "but only if you want me to." He looked down at her hands, how tightly she gripped the envelope, not offering a favor, offering a stake. After a long pause, he reached out and took it, not because he believed her, not yet, but because some part of him still wanted to. They came the next morning, 3 of them, clipboards, measuring tape, phones that never stopped buzzing. One of them wore boots too clean for this kind of work. Another started snapping photos of the barn like it was some ruin worth cataloging. He hadn't been warned, no call, no heads up, just the crunch of tires on gravel and then strangers walking across his land like they already owned part of it. He stepped out of the shed, rag in hand, grease up to his wrists. She was standing near the barn, pointing toward the roofline, talking fast and low. Something about load-bearing frames, something about airflow and ambient lighting. "What the hell is this?" he asked, louder than he meant to. The strangers looked up, hesitated. She didn't. She turned to him like she'd been expecting the question, maybe even bracing for it. "I brought in a few people," she said. "Architect, builder, someone who knows zoning, just to get a sense of what's possible." "What's possible?" he repeated, as if trying the words on for the first time. "You brought strangers onto my land without asking." She stepped forward. "I should have called. I know that." "You should have asked." "I didn't think you'd say yes." He scoffed, tossed the rag down onto the bench. The barn stood behind her, caught in early sunlight, a soft halo warming its splintered edges. It looked better than it had in years, still rough, still scarred, but standing. "I don't need help," he said, each word sharp and deliberate. She didn't flinch. "Yes, you do." He took a step toward her. "This place. It's not some project. It's not a portfolio line or a weekend fixer-upper. It's mine." She nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I'm here. Not to take it. To save it." "I didn't ask you to." "Doesn't matter," she said, quiet but firm. "It's already in motion." Behind her, the architect called out something about structural support. A tape measure snapped shut. She didn't turn, just looked him in the eye like she wasn't sorry. Not even a little. "Too late," her gaze said. "Too late," the wind whispered through the broken boards. "Too late." She found him behind the barn, splitting firewood. Each swing of the axe landed with a crack that echoed through the valley like thunder. He didn't stop when he saw her coming, just split another log clean through, let the pieces fall, and set the next one. She waited, hands in her jacket pockets, hair pulled back, boots muddy from the walk across the field. There was a folder under her arm, thick, creased, the kind that smelled like ink and risk. "You've been avoiding me," she said. He brought the axe down hard. The log split crooked this time, one piece toppling to the side, the other spinning out and landing near her boot. He looked up. "You brought people here. You took over like it was yours to decide." "I brought help," she said. "You needed it." "I needed space, not a circus." Silence stretched between them, taut and sharp. The wind stirred the trees behind them, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. She held out the folder. "It's not a takeover." He didn't move. "It's a deed," she said. "Joint ownership. I bought part of the land that wasn't under lien. Yours is still yours." His brow creased. He wiped his hands on a rag and finally took the folder, opened it, stared. His name was there, in real ink, not just some copy. Her name, too. The parcel marked in red, the sections untouched. His land, still intact. He flipped to the back, to the signature lines. Hers was already there. "I didn't steal your land," she said, steady now. "I saved it." He closed the folder and looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes didn't waver. There was no pride in them, no triumph, just quiet resolve. The kind of look a person wears when they've made a choice and know they'll have to live with it, one way or another. "You didn't ask," he said, voice rough. "No," she admitted, "because I didn't think you'd let me, and I couldn't watch this place vanish." He exhaled slowly, like something inside him had been holding its breath. And for the first time, he didn't know if he was angry or grateful. Maybe both. Maybe something else entirely. The barn creaked in the cooling night air, settling like an old man easing into a chair. He stood just outside it, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, boots planted in the damp soil. Above him the stars were sharp and countless, scattered across the black sky like broken glass. It was the kind of night where sound traveled farther than it should, and every small thing felt bigger under all that quiet. He hadn't lit a fire, didn't want the comfort, he just needed the dark, the stillness. Somewhere behind him the dog barked once, then quieted again. The farmhouse windows glowed dimly, one upstairs lamp still on, hers maybe, or his. He couldn't remember if he'd turned it off. His fingers clenched around the folded paper in his pocket, the deed, already smudged from being read too many times. Her name beside his, legal, binding, real. His father's voice came uninvited, clear as if he were still standing in the field with him. "Don't take handouts. You start taking charity, you'll forget what earning feels like." But this hadn't felt like charity, not exactly. It had felt more like a storm, fast, full of noise, leaving things changed whether you wanted them to or not. He didn't know what to make of her decision, didn't know what it meant long term. Was she staying? Was she just passing through again with a bigger footprint? He tipped his head back and stared at the stars until his neck ached. The silence pressed in around him, but it didn't bring peace. It brought questions. What did it mean if he let her keep helping? What did it say about him if he didn't? He heard the boards creak above him and glanced up. The barn's roof, patched and half-finished, still held against the night. It hadn't fallen. Not yet. He took one slow breath, then another. Thought about his father's hands, calloused, cracked, always working, and thought about hers, ink-stained, steady, offering more than he knew how to accept. He stayed out there a long time, watching the dark, waiting for it to tell him something. It never did. The first nail went in just after sunrise. Not his, one of hers. A woman with a buzzed haircut and arms like scaffolding drove it through the fresh plank without hesitation, like she'd built 100 barns just like this one. Maybe she had. He didn't ask. By noon the sound of saws and hammers carried across the valley, loud and sudden, like the land had decided to wake up all at once. The quiet that had wrapped the place for years, thick, protective, was broken, and not gently. He kept to the edges at first, moved hay, fixed fence posts that didn't need fixing. The crew barely noticed him, too busy framing doorways and hauling supplies up ladders. He caught pieces of their conversations, talk of timelines, foundation pours, solar kits. All things that sounded like the future, like permanence. It rattled him more than he let on. The barn was changing fast. The roof was being reframed. Old warped slats were pulled down and stacked neatly to the side, set aside for reuse, she'd said. Nothing wasted. That was her thing, apparently. Even the broken parts deserved another chance. But outside the property line, the story was different. He heard it when he stopped by the feed store, how word had spread, heard his name tossed around, quiet-like, followed by the phrase, selling out. The diner crowd had always been predictable. First, they ignored you, then they questioned you, then they turned you into a story when your back was turned. He didn't go inside the diner that week, just stood outside long enough to check the posted notice for tractor parts, then walked away when someone tapped the window and waved with too much familiarity. Let them talk. Back at the farm, she was on the roofline, clipboard in one hand, laughing at something the foreman had said. It echoed faintly over the field. Not shrill, not showy, just honest. He watched her for a second longer than he meant to, then turned and went back to the barn, where the sawdust already smelled like something new, like something being reborn. She caught him just as he was coming in from the lower pasture, boots caked in mud and his jacket streaked with dried hay. The sun was already slipping behind the hills, bleeding orange across the sky, and he'd been looking forward to the kind of silence that didn't ask anything of him. Instead, she was waiting on the porch, sleeves pushed up, hair in a loose knot, and something unreadable in her expression. On the table between them sat a roll of thick paper held together with a rubber band, the kind of thing that came with cost, with consequence. "You have a minute?" she asked, not really asking. He didn't answer. Just nodded once and dropped onto the porch step, boots thudding against the wood. She unrolled the blueprints carefully, like they might bite. The paper was clean, precise, measured dreams in black ink. She pointed as she spoke, her voice low and quick, like she'd practiced this. "There'll be a main hall here, 2 cabins, smaller ones, tucked into the trees, all reclaimed material, solar panels, native plant garden out back. We'll host workshops, crafts, woodworking, maybe some grief retreats eventually. Places people can come to slow down." She tapped a section near the barn. "This stays. We don't touch the outer structure. It's too good. We just bring out what's already there." He stared at the lines, the annotations, the future she'd drawn without permission. His fingers curled around his knee. "And the land?" he asked. She looked up, steady. "Still yours? We partner on the project, but the land title stays in your name. You don't lose anything." He didn't answer right away. Didn't know how. The plans felt like a mirror held too close, reflecting things he hadn't dared imagine. Use, purpose, people. laughter in these fields again. But dreams drawn in ink could crumble faster than fence posts in a hard winter. She saw the hesitation. "I'm not trying to save you," she said, "just asking if I can build something with you. If not, I'll leave these here. You decide." She stood, left the plans, and went inside without another word. He sat there long after the sun was gone, staring down at a future that scared him more than the past ever had. The hammering had stopped, but the air still felt loud. The crew had packed up for the day, their tools stacked in neat rows, their trucks rumbling down the drive and out toward the highway. Dust settled behind them. He stood just inside the barn, hands braced against the new frame of the doorway, watching the sun bleed through the wood slats like it was trying to decide whether to stay or disappear. She was behind him. He could feel her presence, stiff and still, like someone waiting for a blow that might come or might not. "You should have asked before all this," he said, voice low but rough around the edges. "Every day there's more, another truck, another stranger walking across land that's not theirs." "You said I could help," she shot back. "I didn't say you could move in." "I'm not moving in," she said. "I'm trying to build something that matters, something that might save this place." "It's too much," he muttered, turning to face her. "Too fast. It doesn't feel like help anymore. It feels like control." She crossed her arms. "No, it feels like change. And you don't like change because it scares you." He took a step closer, jaw clenched. "Don't tell me what scares me." "Fine," she said, her voice rising now. "Then tell me. Tell me what's actually wrong. Because every time something starts to work, you pull away. Is it really about the barn? Or is it easier to push people out than admit you might need someone?" He laughed once, dry and humorless. "You think you know me? You think a few nights in a tent and some pretty blueprints mean you belong here?" Her eyes narrowed. "Say it." "You don't belong here," he said, and the words came out colder than he meant, harder. "This isn't your world. You fix things with money. You draw it out neat on paper and expect the land to cooperate." Silence fell hard after that. Her shoulders dropped slightly, but she didn't step back. "I came here to breathe again," she said quietly, "and I thought maybe you wanted to, too." She left the barn before he could reply. The door creaked shut behind her, not slammed, but final all the same. He stood alone in the half-built frame, surrounded by everything he claimed he wanted, and the echo of the one voice that had dared to believe it with him. The wind hit just after midnight, fast, sharp, and wrong. It howled through the valley like it was searching for something to tear down. He woke to the sound of it slamming against the porch swing, the chains groaning under sudden weight. Rain followed hard behind, slashing against the windows like it was angry. He sat up, heart pounding, listening, not to the storm, but to what it might already have taken, the barn, the frame, the roof that hadn't been secured yet. It wasn't ready. None of it was ready. He pulled on his boots without socks, grabbed his jacket, and stepped into the night. The rain soaked through in seconds. Mud pulled at his heels with every step. Lightning split the sky once, brief, blinding. Then thunder rolled through the hills like a warning. By the time he reached the barn, he could barely see through the downpour, but the silhouette stopped him cold. She was already there. Standing in the open structure, rain streaming down her face and arms, sleeves rolled back, hair plastered to her skin, a hammer in her hand, nails in her pocket. She was driving a support beam back into place, one that had shifted in the wind. Each swing was uneven, furious. Her hands shook. He stepped into the barn, the roof half covered, water dripping through the exposed beams. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted over the storm. She didn't stop, didn't look at him, just drove the nail home. "Can't sleep," she muttered. "Figured the storm would tear it down if I didn't do something." He moved closer. "You'll get hurt." "Too late for that," she said, and the way she said it made him stop. Not angry, not sharp, just tired, like something inside her had cracked open in the wind. He looked around, at the tarps flapping loose, the tools scattered, the beams straining. She'd come out here without telling anyone, without waiting for help, just like him. Lightning lit her face again, and he saw it. Beneath the soaked defiance, the regret. The argument hadn't left her. It was still there, still raw. He took the hammer gently from her hand, said nothing. Just grabbed a board, held it in place, and started working beside her. The wind didn't stop. The rain didn't ease. But the silence between them softened. The nails were cold in his hand, slick with rain. He passed them to her without a word, and she took them like they'd done this 100 times. Neither of them said it, but the fight still lingered in the air between them, bitter, unfinished, but softened now by exhaustion and the steady rhythm of work. He held the beam steady while she hammered. Her fingers trembled at first, still wet, still tense. She missed the first strike, cursed under her breath. He said nothing, just adjusted the board so the nail would catch cleaner. By the third one, she found her rhythm again. Tap to set, strike to drive. The sound of metal into wood became a kind of truce. Rain pounded the tin above their heads, but it was muted under the half-finished roof, like the barn was holding its breath too. They moved from board to board, beam to beam, hands brushing now and then. He steadied the ladder while she climbed. She passed him a second hammer without asking. In that storm-wrapped silence, something shifted. Not dramatic, not sudden, just enough. At one point, her hammer slipped and bounced off the edge of the frame, landing in a puddle. She groaned, sagging against the post. "You all right?" he asked, the first words either of them had spoken in almost an hour. "I'm fine," she said, breathless, just trying to remember if this was actually a good idea. "You dragged 3 architects and a zoning lawyer onto my property. You're in too deep to second-guess now." She looked over her shoulder, eyes wide, then laughed. Just once, loud and surprised, like it had caught her off guard, like she didn't know she still could. He smiled, small and tired. "That's better." "You gonna start charging for encouragement? Only if you start hitting nails on the first swing." She laughed again, deeper this time. The barn didn't feel quite so heavy after that. They worked a little faster, a little lighter. Out in the storm, everything was soaked and uncertain. But inside the half-built frame, under a patchwork roof and a flickering light, they were building something that felt steadier than either of them had been in a long time. The storm had passed by morning, but the air still held the scent of wet earth and sawdust. The barn stood quiet now, like it too was catching its breath after the night's fight. He was sitting on the porch with 2 chipped mugs of coffee when she came out, hair still damp, her jacket draped over one shoulder. She took the mug without a word and sat across from him. No jokes this time, no guarded quips, just the kind of silence that comes when something needs saying and both people already know it. He waited, let the wind fill the space between them. "I used to wear heels every day," she said finally, eyes on the gravel. "Downtown office, view of the river. I used to think that meant I'd made it." He didn't interrupt. "I worked in finance, real estate investment, mostly high-end stuff, corporate, commercial. Big numbers, bigger egos. I got good at building things for people who never had to lift a hand to make them happen." She sipped the coffee, winced. It had gone cold. Still, she didn't stop. "I burned out 2 years ago, woke up one morning and couldn't breathe in my own apartment, couldn't pretend it was just stress anymore, so I left. Sold everything I didn't need, cut ties I thought I'd never live without, bought a used truck, some land up north, thought I'd disappear for a while." She looked at him then, not blinking. "Then I saw this place." He stiffened slightly. It was on a list of foreclosures. Your land. The listing hadn't gone public yet, but it was close. And I don't know what it was. The photos, the name, something about it felt different. Like it didn't belong in a file folder. It belonged to someone who hadn't given up yet. "You bought part of it," he said, not accusing, just stating. "I bought what I could, the section the bank was getting ready to claim. I didn't expect to meet you. And when I did..." I didn't expect to care." The words hung there, fragile but true. He looked out toward the barn, the scaffolding still damp in the light. "You were going to build something no matter who lived here," he said. She nodded. "But it wouldn't have meant anything if it wasn't you." And somehow that was the thing that made him believe her. The county truck rolled up slow, tires grinding the gravel like it didn't want to be there either. It was pale blue, the seal on the door faded from sun and years. He spotted it from the barn ladder, halfway through reinforcing the north wall. When the man stepped out, clipboard in hand, khakis too clean for the road, it was already clear this wasn't a neighborly visit. He climbed down without a word, wiping sweat from his brow as he crossed the lot. She was already walking over from the house, jacket half zipped, reading the man like someone sizing up a threat before it grew teeth. "Morning," the man said, neutral, but with the tone of someone who had practiced being unwelcome. "You're from the county?" she asked. He nodded. "Zoning and planning." He tapped the clipboard like it made the words heavier. "Got a couple red flags kicked back this week. Permits missing, lot lines blurred. Someone raised a flag about an unlicensed commercial build." He looked past them, toward the barn, where scaffolding hugged the side like ambition that had gotten too loud. "We're not commercial," she said. "It's a retreat, seasonal, no permanent residence." "Still needs review," he replied. "You change a structure's function, especially out here, it triggers reclassification. That brings code compliance, land use variance, the whole book. Might be something, might be nothing. But I need to see paperwork. If it's not filed, work stops. Immediately." The silence stretched between them like wire pulled too tight. He stepped in then, his voice low, but even. "The barn's still mine." The man glanced at his clipboard. "Legally, it's a co-owned parcel with a split deed. You're both on record." She straightened, face calm but rigid. "We filed the variance 2 weeks ago. I've got the digital timestamp. I'll forward it today." The county man gave a polite nod, but it was the kind that said he'd be back either way. "Appreciate it. Just doing my job." When the truck pulled away, it left behind more than dust. It left the cold shadow of red tape, of the kind of trouble that doesn't announce itself with a crash, but slowly strangles the breath out of something good. He turned to her. "How bad?" She looked down at her hands. If they dig, it could be bad. And in that moment the barn felt a little less solid, like hope could buckle just as easy as a roof beam under too much weight. The air was thick with that kind of heat that made everything feel heavier. Dust hung in the light, slow to settle, and the barn creaked as the wind shifted through its half-finished frame. He stood by the work table sorting nails by size, not because they needed sorting, but because it gave his hands something to do. She came out from the house, holding a manila envelope. Her face was calm, too calm, like someone holding back news that might break either of them if said the wrong way. "I talked to the county this morning," she said. "They're still digging. They flagged a foundation permit we didn't know was required. There's an appeal process, but it's slow. Could delay everything." He kept his eyes on the nails, jaw tight. Of course it could. She hesitated, then stepped closer, placing the envelope on the edge of the table. "I had a backup plan." He glanced at the envelope but didn't reach for it. "What is it?" "Buyout contract," she said. "Clean and full. I take the whole property. You walk away with enough to pay off the debt, plus a cushion. Start fresh somewhere else. Debt-free. No bank breathing down your neck." The words dropped heavy between them. He straightened slowly, looked her in the eye. "You came all this way just to take what little I have left?" Her face broke, just a little. "I came all this way because I believe in what we were building. But if this fight turns ugly, it could ruin both of us. This," she tapped the envelope, "gives you a way out." He stared at the barn. The light hit the new beams just right, casting shadows across the ground like bones set back in place. He'd spent years watching this land dry out, fall apart. Then she'd shown up, and for the first time he'd started to believe in something that didn't end with loss. "I don't want to walk away," he said quietly. She closed her eyes for a breath. I just wanted to give you the choice. He didn't open the envelope, didn't even touch it. He turned back to the nails, picked up the hammer. This place is all I've got, he said, and for the first time that feels like enough. He wasn't looking for anything that morning, just clearing out the far corner of the barn where old crates had been stacked for years, left behind like memories no one wanted to unpack. Dust rose in clouds with every board he shifted. The wood was dry, brittle. Some of it crumbled in his hands. Beneath a rusted milk crate and a moth-eaten tarp, he found it. A leather-bound book, cracked at the spine, edges curled from time and weather. No title, just a name scrawled on the inside cover in ink that had faded but not disappeared. His father's name. He sat on an overturned bucket, dirt clinging to his jeans, and opened the first page. The handwriting was rough, hurried, but his father's voice lived in the rhythm of it, direct, practical, with bits of hope buried beneath the grit. Barn's holding, but not for long. If the north beam shifts again, we'll lose the roof next spring. Should have rebuilt it when I had the money, should have planted the orchard, should have built the shop for the boys. He turned the page. Been thinking about offering weekend classes, woodwork, maybe engine repair. Folks need hands-on again. Tired of watching the land turn into a line item. This place could be more. Just need time. Just need help. Each line pressed deeper into him. There were sketches, rough floor plans, layouts of what the barn could have been, not a relic, a gathering place. He'd never known any of this. His father never talked about dreams. He talked about bills, weather, what needed fixing. He closed the journal slowly, holding it like something sacred. Outside he could hear the wind pushing through the trees, the creak of the scaffolding, the distant rhythm of someone working. Her, probably, already repairing what the night storm had loosened. All this time he'd thought he was holding on to something for himself. But maybe it had always been more than that. Maybe this barn had always been meant for more than just shelter. He stood gripping the journal tight. Maybe what scared him most wasn't that she was changing the place, but that she was building the version of it his father had only dared to dream. The days stretched out like the heat, long, still, and full of things unsaid. She stopped coming to the work site. No more early morning check-ins, no more shared coffee or quiet remarks about the progress. The laughter that had once sparked between them had dulled, like something that had burned too bright, too fast. She stayed in the house mostly, curtains drawn. Her boots sat untouched by the door, coated in a thin film of dust. He told himself to give her space, but each day the silence grew louder, as if the unfinished barn itself had started noticing her absence. On the third evening, just as the sun was bleeding into the hills, he found her in the spare room. The closet door was open. An old duffel bag lay half-packed on the bed. A stack of paperwork sat beside it, permits, receipts, blueprints, all of it organized, precise. Her out. She didn't look up when he stepped in. She was folding a flannel shirt, slow and mechanical, like the movement was the only thing keeping her from breaking. "You leaving?" he asked, voice low. She paused, fingers tightening around the fabric. "Maybe." He stepped farther into the room. "You're not the kind of person who walks away." "I'm not the kind of person who digs in where they're not wanted either." She finally looked at him, and there was something raw in her eyes. Not anger, not even disappointment, just weariness, the kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. "Maybe I rushed it," she said. "Maybe I let myself believe in something too fast. In this place. In you." He didn't answer right away. His throat was tight. He looked at the duffel, at her hand on the zipper, like she wasn't sure if she wanted to close it or not. "I never said I didn't believe," he murmured. "I just didn't know how to catch up." She gave him a tired smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Maybe we weren't building the same thing. He didn't know what to say to that, not yet. So they stood there, sunset spilling between them, caught between staying and going, with nothing but silence left to hold. She was stuffing a roll of blueprints into her bag when he stepped into the room. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, just a dull glow behind the hills, casting the farmhouse in a quiet gray. She didn't hear him at first, or maybe she did and didn't want to react. Her movements were slower this time, less certain. He held the journal in his hand, thumb pressed between two pages like a marker. His father's handwriting stared up at him, faint but resolute. He crossed the floor with quiet steps, the old floorboards creaking beneath his boots, and stopped just behind her. "I need to show you something," he said. She froze. Slowly she turned, her expression guarded, like she couldn't take one more thing that might push her over the edge. Her eyes were rimmed red, like she hadn't slept, or had tried too hard. He handed her the journal. She took it without speaking, her fingers brushing his for just a second longer than necessary. When she opened it, her eyes moved fast across the pages, then slowed. He watched her lips part slightly as she read, a breath catching in her throat. The blueprints forgotten at her side. "He wanted this," he said. His voice was low but sure, steadier than it had been in days. He wanted to build a retreat here, a place for people to come and fix things, hands, hearts. He just never had the time, or the right help. Her fingers trembled over the ink. She blinked hard, and then the tears came, not loud, not theatrical, just slow and quiet, falling onto the open page. She pressed her palm to her mouth and looked up at him like she couldn't believe what she was holding. "You never told me," she whispered. "I didn't know until I found it." He sat beside her on the edge of the bed, the weight of the journal between them. This place. It was his unfinished story, but maybe it doesn't have to stay that way. She closed the book gently, like it deserved reverence. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Then let's finish it, for both of them." He nodded, eyes damp but unflinching. Neither of them moved for a while. They didn't need to. The decision had already taken root in the space between them, quiet, firm, and real. The community center smelled like old coffee and floor polish. The air inside was thick with small-town tension, the kind that doesn't show its face until change walks through the door and asks for a seat at the table. Folding chairs lined up in crooked rows. Faces he'd known for years, some nodding, some already bracing for a fight. She sat in the front row, papers in her lap, pen tucked behind her ear. He stood against the back wall, hat in hand, heart pounding harder than it had the day his father died. The mayor, an aging man with a soft voice and a hard jaw, called the meeting to order with a tired gavel tap. "We've got a variance request on the table for partial commercial use of agricultural land. Some of you have voiced concerns." Voiced was generous. It had been weeks of whispered opinions turning into public resistance. Too fast, too big, outsiders meddling. People didn't like what they couldn't control, especially when it came with blueprints and vision. One woman stood. Ms. Hartley ran the post office for 30 years. "We've all worked this land our whole lives," she said. "Now someone from out of town shows up, starts talking about retreats and tourists. Feels like we're being pushed out of our own story." There were murmurs of agreement, a few nods, some eyes flicked toward him. Another man stood. Tucker, from down the ridge. "That barn's looked half dead for a decade. Somebody's finally fixing it, and we're going to say no just 'cause it's different?" The mayor glanced toward the back wall. "Anyone else?" The room quieted. Then he stood. He hadn't prepared a speech. He didn't need to. "I've been on that land my whole life," he said. "Watched it wear down like an old coat, and I held on to it out of pride. But pride don't fix broken beams. Don't fix people either." He looked around the room, at the worn faces, the calloused hands, the crossed arms. "This isn't about losing something. It's about letting it grow. My father wanted this land to give something back. So do I." Silence followed, not empty, just heavy, like the air before a storm, full of something about to shift. Then someone clapped, just once, then another. Until the room wasn't divided anymore, it was deciding. And maybe, just maybe, choosing to believe in something new. The first car rolled in just after noon, tires crunching slow over gravel that had been raked clean that morning. Then another, and another. By the time the sun crested over the trees, the old pasture-turned parking lot was dotted with vehicles from towns he'd never been to, license plates from 2 counties over, one from out of state. He stood on the porch, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, watching the barn glow against the fading afternoon light. It didn't look new, not exactly. It looked lived in. The wood was still scarred in places, still sun-bleached in others. But the windows were clean, the roof sealed tight, and the doors swung open wide like the place had taken a deep breath and finally let it out. Inside, candles flickered in mason jars set along the rafters, casting soft gold across the beams. Twine-wrapped bundles of lavender and rosemary hung from hooks near the entrance. She'd insisted on planting herbs in the old garden bed, where weeds had once claimed everything. Now it smelled like summer and memory. People filtered in slowly, some hesitant, some curious, a few holding hands like they weren't sure what they were walking into. A man paused to touch the barn wall, fingers dragging across the grain like he was remembering something he couldn't name. A kid darted past the entry and straight to the workbench display where hand tools had been laid out like artifacts. Laughter followed, soft and contagious. She moved through the space with ease, not hosting, welcoming, dressed simple, sleeves rolled up, hair braided back, clipboard nowhere in sight. He watched as she leaned in to speak with a woman near the coffee urn, then smiled at a couple who had driven 3 hours just to see what all the talk was about. She caught his eye across the room. Just a second, just enough. He nodded once. Outside, wind brushed the tall grass that lined the path. The herbs swayed. The lights hummed. This place had once been the end of a story. Now it felt like the beginning of a dozen more. The sky was wide and clear, a soft blue broken only by the slow drift of clouds. Late afternoon sun warmed the fields, casting long shadows from the barn, which now stood solid and still, like it had always meant to become what it was now. Out past the fence line, beneath the same oak where she'd camped that first night, a blanket had been laid over the grass, faded quilt squares, stitched together like the kind you find in old cedar chests. She was already there when he walked over, 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a mason jar of lemonade, and a paper bag resting between them. Her boots were kicked off to the side, toes bare in the grass, hair loose for once, catching sunlight like thread. She didn't say anything when he sat down beside her. She just smiled, handed him one of the sandwiches, and leaned back on her elbows. The breeze was slow, lazy, the kind that made you forget how hard everything had once been. He looked out at the land, green in places that used to be brown, neat rows of herbs along the old garden fence, laughter drifting faintly from the barn where a workshop had just wrapped up. A group of women were still milling around, talking about soil, about starting over. She reached into the bag and pulled out a peach. It was bruised on one side, soft with ripeness. She turned it in her palm for a second, then handed it to him without a word. He took it, thumb brushing over the skin, and let out a quiet laugh. "Full circle," he said. She tilted her head, smiling gently. "I figured it was time." He nodded, biting into it, juice running down his thumb. It tasted like summer, like forgiveness, like something that had been waiting all season to ripen. They didn't say much after that. They didn't need to. The tree above them rustled just enough to remind them it was still there, like the land itself was watching, remembering, approving. The morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after the dust has cleared, and the noise of change has softened into rhythm. The retreat had emptied for the week, no cars in the lot, no laughter echoing from the barn, no hum of tools or overlapping conversations about grief and starting over. Just stillness, and that soft kind of peace that doesn't announce itself but lives in the background like breath. He stood near the side of the house, shovel in hand, staring at the small hole he'd dug beneath the kitchen window. The dirt was rich and dark, soft from yesterday's rain. A young sapling stood beside him, roots wrapped in burlap, slender trunk swaying slightly in the breeze. Not much to look at yet, barely shoulder height, but full of possibility. She walked out with 2 mugs of coffee, barefoot on the porch steps, sleeves of her sweater pushed to her elbows. Her hair was still damp, like she hadn't bothered with anything more than a rinse and a towel. He liked her best that way, unpolished, undone, present. He nodded toward the tree. Figured this was a good spot. She stepped down beside him, eyes scanning the space. "What kind is it?" "Red maple," he said. "They grow slow, but they last." She handed him the coffee, then crouched beside the hole, fingers brushing the soil. "That what you're hoping for?" He didn't answer right away, just knelt beside her, easing the sapling into the ground with the kind of care you give something you don't want to bury, but hope will rise. When the roots were settled and the earth patted back into place, she placed her hand gently on the soil, palm flat, grounding it, and maybe herself. "Let's see what else grows," she said. He looked at her, not with surprise, but with a kind of quiet understanding, the same way he looked at the barn now, and the fields, and the life that had started to sprout in between all the things they'd nearly lost. He didn't need to answer her. The tree would speak for both of them in time.